Hi, and welcome to today's podcast. Today we're discussing technology's role in supporting accessibility and inclusivity in the workplace and beyond. For a long time, accessibility in the workplace has been treated as an afterthought, sometimes a tick in the box at the end of a project, but that mindset is shifting, and it's shifting fast. I'm really thrilled today to be joined by Robyn Spinks, Head of Inclusive Design at RNIB. Would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about your background, Robyn?
Hi, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Robyn Spinks, Head of Inclusive Design at RNIB, and I've spent about 25 years working with people with disabilities, but also working with organisations to tackle the challenges that disability of any kind might pose for an organisation and an individual. So it's a real pleasure to work with a great team of people, to work across multiple industries, across many countries, and really to enable people to come together around the challenge of how do we create greater inclusion, whether it's across products, services, people, or culture. It's a constant challenge, and it's something that we feel really passionate about.
Fantastic. So I suppose before we dig into what's working really well, and can we talk about kind of like the day-to-day reality, kind of where there's gaps in technology, what people with visual impairment and other disabilities are actually facing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really exciting time to be having this conversation. So, there's never been a better time to be looking at this and asking this question. However, when you strip back the technology, I think the reality is that a lot of blind and partially sighted people and people with other disabilities continue to face really big challenges when it comes to accessing information. And if you think about just how quickly technology has moved in the last 3 or 4 years, you can imagine if you're someone who's not particularly tech confident, that is challenging. That said, the tools that are out there now and the capability of technology makes it a really exciting time to have this conversation.
Fantastic. And I suppose thinking about technology, this AI is having a massive impact at the moment. Things like Copilot, I know that you're rolling that out. I think in Ignite this last week, it was announced that Copilot has now got voice accessibility. What sort of impact do you think things like that are going to have kind of with your audience?
I mean, I think we continue to see developments that really make AI more and more meaningful and more, confidence inspiring for people from day to day. It's about making that first step and getting people started and getting them the confidence to kind of go forward and recognize what is possible to do. So recognize what you can do with AI, how that can improve your workflow, how it can save you time and create more accessibility. So I think in the first instance, it's a behavioral thing almost.
Definitely.
It's bringing people on board and getting that sense of buy-in and understanding. Once you begin to see that, typically you're on a roll.
Yeah.
And you're looking for new uses for AI all the time, as am I.
Yeah. And I suppose it also helps you to unlock new talent, doesn't it? I think it removes those barriers to kind of get the right people into roles, allow people to kind of flourish in what they want to be able to do and kind of the impact that they have.
Absolutely. And I think it's about kind of using AI and using the tech to enable individuals to give their best, So how can you tap into the best capabilities and attributes that someone's got for a particular role? How can you use AI to make that greater, give the person more confidence, but also enable them to feel like they're achieving more, they're moving further, they're not just getting a job, they're maybe moving through the ranks and actually, improving their career and using AI to do that in ways that they maybe hadn't thought about before.
Fantastic. And I suppose it's not just about technology, is it? We've got to look at kind of the people around it, kind of process. So what sorts of things should leaders be thinking about, obviously outside of the tech stack, to kind of make sure that accessibility is a part of everything that they're focusing on within an organisation?
I think it all comes down to culture. It's about setting the tone for a really inclusive team, a team that listens, a team that talks about accessibility and inclusion regularly and actually just realizes that people can be supported, people can be given adaptations, any adjustments they need.
Yep.
And I think if you're having that dialogue with your teams and you're promoting a culture of inclusion from the top of the organization, I think it enables people to be more open, but also enables them to share what they need and then ultimately to get the support that they require, rather than people being quiet about it. You know, for years, we know of many people who've tried to maybe hide their disability in the workplace. You know, one of the advantages of having all those tools available is, look, maybe this can help me. Maybe if the individual doesn't know how the tech can help them, working with other people, you can kind of collaboratively discover what's available and what's going to enable you to feel more included.
Fantastic. And I suppose looking ahead, kind of what's on the horizon for you at the moment? What sorts of things what are the things that are exciting you at the moment?
I mean, we are really busy with all sorts of projects across the team. So everything from smart TVs to showers to banknotes to ATMs to chip and pin machines. We've got a really diverse workflow. I think in terms of big trends that are coming along that we're super excited about, smart glasses, probably on a daily basis now, we're having a conversation with someone about smart glasses. And we're thinking about that, you know, that big shift that we're probably about to witness where, you know, if you fast forward 10 years, it's possible that the smart glasses might end up being the device of choice for most people rather than the smartphone, depending on who you believe in the industry. But, you know, the data is there and the evidence is there to suggest that that transition's really beginning to accelerate. So when you do that, one of the things that's super interesting from a blind and low vision point of view is you instantly get rid of the camera placement issue, because any app or service that runs on a camera, you know, if you can't see the camera or where it's pointing, that's a big barrier. So actually having the focus fixed in the corner of your glasses, having a camera based there, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities and arguably improves security as well. There are so many areas of life where technology is opening up opportunities, but also enabling people to really have a more inclusive life going forward. So, you know, at the same time, there are huge challenges. So one for us is chip and pin. So the disappearance of chip and pin in its traditional form. When you go to pay for your restaurant meal, someone will come to you with a little terminal. And traditionally, it would have had rubbery plastic keys. Now, those devices are being phased out and replaced with a flat surface. So imagine being someone who's registered severely visually impaired like me, and being presented with a flat surface. There's nothing tactile to feel, there's no point of orientation. But more than that, on the screen, there is an ever more complex kind of array of graphics and wordage. And all you want to do is pay for dinner. You don't want someone to be calling out the information that's on the screen. That's a huge challenge. We're working with UK Finance and the industry to work towards a solution to that. But, you know, that'd be one of the examples of a really big challenge that's affecting a whole industry. That's not just affecting blind and partially sighted people, but people with other conditions that struggle with information are struggling with that too. So it's a bigger kind of societal issue that we're working to try and challenge at the moment. You know, against that backdrop, there's a huge amount of interesting things coming along. So recently got the chance to try out an autonomous vehicle.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, and actually for the very first time to be on a public road on my own, you know, in a vehicle with a playlist cranked up and,
amazing,
you know, other cars around me. And for somebody who has never had a driver's license, that's an amazingly liberating prospect. And, you know, it'll arrive in London, you know, next year. So you will start to see some really big shifts as that kind of technology becomes available. What's really critical, though, is that autonomous vehicle systems are designed inclusively and take account of the needs of people with various disabilities. So we're working with that whole industry really to try and make sure that we get a rollout that's smooth and inclusive for people, because the potential is huge given the right deployment and the right inclusion considerations.
That's so interesting. And when you were in that autonomous car, did you feel safe? What sort of experience was it?
Yeah, really safe. I mean, I was incredibly lucky to be trying it at the same time as the leader of the Road Safety Foundation in the UK, Susie Sharman. So that was reassuring to have the top road safety person in the car with me as well. But what a quickly became aware of was that, you could feel the car checking and hesitating and being aware, much in the same way that if you're in a human-driven car, you can feel sometimes someone pressing the brake pedal, or you can feel them accelerate. It was incredibly smooth, and I think it builds confidence, just spending maybe 20 minutes in a city centre and realising how the car manages to navigate, an oil spill, a prang of cars on the road, or a delay, and the information that it gives to you. Once you can see that it can cope well around that, your own confidence builds. So I don't think it will be terribly long before people will be, writing papers and doing emails without having to look at the road. And that's the sort of first behavioural thing you recognise. You don't need to engage with the road once you've put your trust in the system. So we'll see a lot of examples of that, I think, coming around. And that's really exciting if you're visually impaired. It just opens up a huge opportunity for spontaneous travel. People who've got a car just decide to go out of their house, get in the car and drive to the beach and put their favourite tunes on at full volume, and like suddenly the world's a lovely place. That's not really an option at the moment if you're a non-driver, if you're visually impaired. So a lot of opportunities there that are coming along. I think what we do continue to see, though, are systems that are designed by people who don't have experience of disability. So a huge challenge going forward is to get more disabled people working in tech, but also working in leadership roles, so that we can begin to see, if you like, the inclusive mindset filtering through into the design of apps and websites and services, so that people have got a better experience when they're actually using those services, and not needing to go back and retrofit, being able to take something and use it, whatever your capabilities are, and feel included and feel like it's designed for you as an individual, and that it's flexible. Think about how many apps or services you use. Can you change the background color? Can you change the font? Can you change the amount of space that's used? How much customization is there? And I think, what we're really striving for is kind of ultimate flexibility to take account of the user need as it changes, because 250 people will learn today that there's nothing further can be done for their site. Just in the UK, they'll be told nothing further that can be done. Really sorry, you're losing your sight. Can you imagine the trauma? Can you imagine the heartache and the concern? On a daily basis, that's what our iClinic liaison officers are really working to connect with people at that point of diagnosis and give people optimism, give them the positivity to see a way forward, and show them what can be done. So how can you use technology? How can you use services to give you a more supported, more connected, more inclusive life? And a lot of that is just giving people the right mindset, but enabling them to learn and discover and to build confidence. But critical, as I say in there, is this big shift that we need to make with designers to get design coming through that is inclusive at its core and flexible and adaptable.
I think it's interesting you say it's inclusivity, isn't it? It's not just blind and partially blind people. It's kind of looking at kind of all disabilities and bringing that through.
100%.
And I think that's really important, isn't it, to kind of see how many different people that you can drive impact for when you're rolling out this technology.
We do consultancy for all sorts of companies all around the world, and everywhere you go in the world, the legislation is obviously pan-disability, whether it's the Equality Act, European Accessibility Act, or the US legislation. So at the core of what we do is inclusive design, but we bring a specialism around vision loss. And also what we're cognizant of is that when we talk to, consumer electronics manufacturers, for example, that's the challenge that a lot of people find most difficult to accommodate, the sight loss one. So how do we make a UI work for someone who is a screen reader user? How do we make it work for someone who uses magnification? So they can be the most challenging parts of the inclusive design puzzle, and we bring that specialism to our work. And really what we want to do is pass that on to people, but also bigger than that, we want to create organizations where there's a mindset around inclusion at the core of the organization. So when you're designing something new, you're automatically thinking, how would that work for a colleague who has hearing impairment? How would that work for someone who's partially sighted? What about neurodiversity? What do we need to do to make the solution as flexible and adaptable as possible? And bearing in mind that people's needs change as they move through the workplace and as they move through life. So, customization and flexibility, I think, are key, along with that flexible mindset that actually recognizes that your brilliant team member could come in next week and share with you that they've got a health concern that you'd absolutely no idea about, because why would you? And they want to know what that might mean. What will that mean going forward for their job? How do you deal with the uncertainty around health concerns and disabilities? And how can you do that in a way that is positive and supportive and just enables people to continue to thrive? Because I think at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. That's what, if we, as an organization, if we can enable everybody to thrive, then we're also factoring in their access needs, because we need to do that if we're going to enable them to thrive.
Fantastic. And I think whilst there's lots of technology out there, how do you think people are adapting with training and kind of upskilling? Do you think there's still a bit of a gap from technology partners or providers in kind of that adoption piece? Because obviously there's so much out there, isn't there now?
I'm a massive fan of training. I really don't think that any of us can have enough training, to be honest. And even if I go to a training course on something that I think I'm quite proficient in, I'm going in with an attitude that says I can always learn more, and I always do, I do a lot of media pieces for the organization, but I do media training as well, and I learn new tips and new ideas. So I think for tech, there's a huge opportunity to do that. I mean, it's bizarre, one of the things I love doing is sort of like, if I get a moment to watch a YouTube video, I love looking at like 20 tips or 20 hidden tricks on Android or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Every time I look at something like that, I learn something, and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, I didn't realize if you long pressed that, it also turned into, so it's kind of peeling away layers of the onion. And I think that's part of the mindset, is that ability to continuously peel away the layers and discover, because discovery is critical, for all of us. Going through our work in life, I think we're constantly discovering, constantly uncovering new things and saying, look, how might I use that? What might that mean? How could it make my, day better? Voice typing, there's a really good example. So I do most of my emails now by voice typing. And I do that because I've discovered that it will reduce my eye fatigue. It will reduce my kind of finger fatigue. And it also means I can go for a walk in the fresh air. Depending on the content I'm creating and the sensitivity of it, I can go and, write a paper or write a response to something and have a walk in the countryside or on the beach, or, get in a kayak and write your response.
Fantastic.
Because when the blood is flowing and you're moving, you're kind of thinking better anyway as well. So yeah, it's just discover new ways of doing things. And I think don't get stuck in your ways. I think it's really easy. It's part of the human condition, isn't it? We tend to like doing things the way that we do them, but there's an old saying, isn't there? If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. And I kind of feel like that's the premise to learning more about what tech can offer and deliver, because what you quickly discover is there's more capability there, there's more efficiency, there's more confidence, and you just need to peel away that layer and discover it.
Fantastic. I suppose we've covered kind of autonomous cars, kind of looking at challenges around bank receivers and things like that. Are there any other kind of emerging technologies that you're really excited about that's kind of coming down the line?
Yeah, I mean, I alluded to smart glasses kind of earlier on. I think one of the things that's interesting there is that you've got several products on the market now that enable you, once you've put them on your face, enable you to connect to, be it a Nintendo Switch or a large display. And all of a sudden, you've got the opportunity to have a 100-inch screen, right? Essentially sitting on your nose bridge. Now, clearly, as that begins to scale and develop, that's got massive implications for real estate and for the way that we think about organizations and the way that we think about work. You know, sometimes the most productive place to be, you know, when writing, for example, I never sit at my desk at home and write creatively. It doesn't happen. So I take myself off to the forest floor or the coast or, you know, a favorite cafe, and I write there, because that's where the creativity comes, or go on a walk. So being able to do that with that technology wherever works for you, I think huge. You know, there's a huge opportunity there. And then likewise, thinking about what you can deliver with AI, thinking about that multimodal input of information and multimodal interrogation of information, there's an opportunity for all of us, I think, to kind of look into new ways of doing things. I think a kind of critical concern throughout all of this, though, is the needs. And I think blind and partially sighted people, particularly here, but not exclusively, I think, let's imagine that when we've got an experience, a tech-based experience, how does it work if you cannot see that 100-inch screen? What's the interaction model like? Is it a comparable and equitable alternative to using the screen? That's a big, big challenge. So if we think about, you know, it all comes down to designing beyond vision. What's the experience like for a user? But if you can't see the display, is there an equitable user experience on offer? That's the key question, I think.
So what accommodations have you seen that have had a wider impact on your sector?
You know, there are so many. Let's just think about, first of all, things like the curb cut, as the Americans call it. Yeah, so the kind of drop curb, that's great if you're a wheelchair user, but actually as a dad with a buggy a few years ago, really appreciated those. And actually just makes it easier for anyone who's unloading something from their car and trying to move it across the road or into their house. So, you know, ramped and smoothed access would be one example. Maybe even power doors, your hands busy, doors actually able to open for you automatically. Fantastic. But then bringing it down to the level of consumer technologies, audiobooks. We've seen a massive explosion in the use of audiobooks and the popularity of them for podcasts as well, for audio. You know, so kind of eyes-free ways of consuming content. Everybody loves them. Why would you not? And again, you know, designed to be something originally that would be about people with sight loss, but actually super helpful for everybody. And lots of examples of that. I guess if you even think about crossing the road and using the rotating cone underneath the crossing control, that's fantastic. You know, if the weather's bad, if you've got kids with you and you want to show them how someone who's got dual sensory loss might cross the road, there are so many examples. Read aloud, you know, read aloud's a fantastic capability. A lot of the stuff we're starting to see in browsers now across the technology spectrum, where you can have AI summarize an article for you, and you can have two voices, one asking questions and one providing the responses. Again, great from a disability perspective, but really good from a general usability perspective. I love listening to stuff while I'm cooking, you know? So again, that it suits me to listen from an access point of view, but it also suits me to be, you know, making my curry and listening to a podcast at the same time.
So from an employer's perspective, what responsibilities do you think that they need to be really focusing on to make sure that they're meeting the needs of all their users, whether it's from a accessibility perspective, an inclusion perspective, just to make sure that nobody within a workforce is left out?
I think it's really critical that all employers look at the provisions of the Equality Act and the European Accessibility Act. But, you know, if you wanted to distill that down, have you got a culture where you're listening, asking questions and responding positively to people's needs? And are you being proactive? Are you asking questions to make sure that people can receive support that's available? Are you showing people that it's possible to do things in different ways, to make accommodations? You know, do you feel like you're an example of good practice? I think that's a really key question. And, you know, for all of us, every single person, every organization let's have accessibility and inclusion on the agenda at every meeting, and let's have people across the company who are championing it, who are bringing things in and who are saying, look, here's another way that we can do something. If an individual needs adjustments, let's make sure that we can provide those to the person in the best possible way and in a really timely fashion as well. So we hear horror stories about people waiting weeks, sometimes months for adjustments. Let's get it down to the level of, when you order something online on your phone and it arrives the next day, that's the level of service we need to provide to people in the workplace who need adjustments. What we'll see when we can deliver that level of adjustment and that level of responsiveness, we'll see fewer friction points, more integration, and a happier workforce. And just the mindset that thinks about the fact that not everyone will see, not everyone will hear. Some people think differently. So actually what we need to do is be able to put in place responsive policies and practices that support people. And then we need to monitor those as well. So we need to be able to say, look, how's that doing? Have we done well on it? Could we do better? What do we need to do to make it more fulfilling and more inclusive?
And do you think the legislation that's in place at the moment goes far enough to support people with disabilities?
I think the current legislation clearly doesn't go far enough because it becomes about people taking cases to court and having test cases. What would be a lot better is to actually have a proactive requirement for people to demonstrate their ability to make changes, to make accommodations. So to show how it would be possible to do something with a large display or with speech or in a different workplace environment. So just demonstrate, have a requirement to demonstrate flexibility and that ability to adapt. And also to incentivize that. I think the legislation at the moment says, look, if you don't do this, X will happen. Let's turn it around and make it much more about how can we enable every individual in the team to deliver their best work? How can you as a line manager enable the people who work for you to deliver to the best of their ability and to feel supported? And that's when the magic happens.
And obviously with this new technology, there is an associated cost. Do you find that the technology and the cost kind of balances itself out over time so that it is accessible for more people to be able to kind of get their hands on kind of the new things like the glasses and those sorts of technologies?
A lot of mainstream technology features more accessibility baked in, but we need to be really mindful of the fact that some people will still require third-party assistive technologies that can be quite expensive. So there's a really important scheme in place called the Access to Work scheme, and every employer should be aware of that and should be encouraging their staff to use it, to make an application to it. And that scheme will basically share the cost and ensure that there's no disadvantage for an employer in recruiting someone with a disability. So the additional cost can be supported so it doesn't become a case of employing someone without a disability because they're going to be cheaper than a person with. That should never happen. But I think we need to do more to promote access to work and also to promote that sense of looking at accommodations and constantly assessing what it's possible to do and how we can optimize the workplace for people. How can we use digital to optimize the workplace for everybody who works there, whatever their capability is now and into the future.
Fantastic. And then if there were any tips that you could give to employers, have you got any kind of top tips to kind of help drive innovation when they're looking at accessibility, whether it's kind of looking at kind of new use cases for AI?
We can offer support to employers of all kinds and all industries and all sizes of company as well. So we'd be really happy to talk to anybody who's embarking on that journey, really to say, look, how can we optimize for inclusive design, whether that's from the point of view of product or service or people or culture. We work across all of those areas. I think it starts with a listening exercise. It also often starts with an analysis of what's happening now and how could it be optimized. But, where are the opportunities and how can you factor them into your business plan? When you're developing a new product, for example, what's the inclusive design component of that product journey? That's a really good question to ask before you've even started, because you can do it without any additional cost if you factor it in then.
I think, as you say, when you're looking at those things, having the right representation when you're creating new products, new offerings, kind of making sure that everybody's kind of represented and can have an impact. And also it's a say really into kind of how it could affect them directly, because I think it must be very difficult. It must be difficult for you to kind of make sure that people are always, there's so big a spectrum, isn't there, is what I'm trying to say, around kind of getting people involved, making sure that you've got representation from kind of all areas. It must be really important.
I think it's a constant challenge, and I think as long as we're looking to constantly improve and do better and not resting on our laurels, I think that's got to be the attitude. It's kind of, how can we do more? Even companies who think they're doing a lot, a healthy attitude is, we think we've made great progress, but we want to do more. And how can we do more? Talking to disabled people, talking to potential candidates, but also, if you've got a recruitment image on your website, for example, is there any element of that communicates inclusiveness? Is there an element that would say to somebody who's a wheelchair user or who's blind or who's, hard of hearing, you'd be welcome here? What does that messaging look and feel like? And how does it work in practice?
Robyn, thank you so much for today and sharing your insight into the stories. I think if there's one thing to remember, it's that building a truly inclusive workplace is about people, the culture, and the smart use of technology. And when you get all three working together, everybody really benefits.